This podcast is dedicated to the memory of Jenny Beck, our fellow Follycast contributor who sadly died last year. As a fellow author, she would have loved speaking to Ben, so this podcast is for her.
From Primrose Hill to Barkingside, no matter where you run, you've just got no place left to hide. London is inspired, but I'm tired. Let's go to bed.
Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Follycast, the Rivers of London podcast. I'm Margaret in Sutton.
I'm Richard in Fulham.
And I'm Ben in, I'm not going to say.
Yes, you heard that correctly. Today we're delighted to be joined by Ben Aaronovitch, actually live with us today, author of Rivers of London series that our podcast celebrates, and the latest addition to the series, the novella, The Masquerades of Spring, which is out in September. So welcome to you, Ben.
Hello, it's nice to be here. Yes, I've got my own podcast. Hooray! At last, fame. You know, another 30 years and I might be up there with, I don't know, Sarah Pinborough or someone.
So Jan, our colleague, is on holiday this week and will be back for the next episode, but this is going to be Margaret and I chatting with Ben for the next hour, hopefully. Now, we're going to assume that if listeners are following along with the Follycast in order, then they're probably up to date in terms of potential spoilers, but we'll try and avoid any major ones just in case. So Ben, if it's okay with you, we thought we'd start at the beginning with the origin story of the series itself. What stage was the series at when it got commissioned a decade and a half ago?
I had a first book, but I knew that they would want some idea that it was a series, and I wanted to write a series because in my mind it was a sort of detective series in the way that, say, Morse or the 87th Precinct novels are. So I always knew there were going to be more of them. You know, you have your detective, you have your murder, and each book is a different case. So I wrote a paragraph as if I knew what I was talking about, and then they said they didn't like the second book, so I had to change. They didn't like the idea for the second book because it's the book that went on to become Foxglove Summer, and they said you can't go out of London. We're just getting used. You know, we need our boy in London. In fact, they said that before I submitted Foxglove Summer, but by that time I got to the point where I could ignore them. So and then it proved that I said, look, they will enjoy you guys. Hopefully, you guys will enjoy Peter being taken out of his comfort zone at that point. He's been in it long enough. I mean, they might have been right about the second book, but by that time, I figured, and then I came up with the tagline, you can take the boy out of London, but you can't take London out of the boy, right? And then by that point, they went, okay. But anyway, so so all I had for Moon Over Soho was a title. And when push came to shove, and Whispers Underground, it's going to be in the underground. That was pretty much all I had for those two books. But, I knew they were going to ask me for a series, so I had to show willing. And as a former bookseller, I knew that you wanted to create a shelf presence as quickly as possible, which is why book 1 and book 2 come out within about 3 months of each other, because that way you have a shelf presence. Because I know as a bookseller that you can forget to restock a single book. But when there's like 3 or 4 books there, you go, oh, I haven't got number 1. And then you go and order number 1 to stock up your shelves, you see. And that's quite, and psychologically reminds the bookseller to, and also you take up more space on the shelf. So I don't know if you've noticed, but me and Joe Abercrombie have been fighting for that top shelf left.
It makes sense. I guess there's also the feeling that if there's 2 books, then it must be good because they commissioned a second book.
There's also that, and also they what you generally get, what I got, and it was common practice, this is 14 years ago, is a 3-book contract cross-linked, which means I had to earn out on all 3 advances before I got any money from sales, which is, which I was expecting to be much more difficult than it was. No one expected these books to be this successful. We were gearing up for middleism. That was what I thought. I was going to be a middleist author. My agent did, the publishers did. Galantis specializes in middleist authors in the sense that science fiction books tend to have legs in the way that, say, literary fiction doesn't. So unless you become very, very celebrated, a literary fiction book will go on, win the Booker Prize, sell 44,000 books, and no one ever reads it ever again. That is, if anyone ever read it in the first place. And with science fiction, it's famous, and crime, it's famous for having legs, so that these books will keep selling those, and a lot of people have made their career on creating like long series of detective series that just people go, oh, there's more, and they go off and they read all the book. I know I do, and then get very cross when you get to the end of the series and then you have to wait for the next book. Oh God, terrible.
The series soon adopted the name of the first book of the overall brand becoming The Rivers of London, and that's proved so successful. Was there any debate about this, or whether it should have like a more traditional label, such as like the Peter Grant mysteries?
No, I insisted on calling it The Rivers of Grant. Rivers of Grant. Rivers of London books right from the start. No, there wasn't any discussion. We didn't discuss this. You remember, I wasn't expected to be a big author, and so therefore, I got everyone's attention after they dealt with all the other important people. So no, these things aren't discussed. You have a very, very idea that publishing is organized, especially our publishing on my end of the publishing. No, we're not that organized. We get that organized sort of 8 books in when you're a big best-selling author, and suddenly they go, oh, we must have this and we must have that. But first 3 or 4 books, nah, they don't, unless it's they've paid £1 million for it or something. You don't get that kind of stuff. So I wanted them to put numbers on it, and they said no, though.
Wow.
I wanted numbers, but apparently that's a no, so you're not allowed to have it. But I would like, as a bookseller, you see, I wanted numbers because it's easier to bloody put them in order if you have the numbers instead of having to check the titles. Other booksellers say you should do it in title order. You see, they go, you should do it in title, which offends me at a fundamental level that you. So when I was running out the science fiction section, I used to carefully make sure all the Pratchetts were in publication order. On those moments when I was left to myself, I would then put them so that you would have all the witches books, all the guards books, all the because that's the way my brain works. So all the Rincewind book, and then fight myself over whether the wizard books counted as Rincewind books or not, and things like that. So that was my, that just gives you an insight to how I can procrastinate at an industrial level.
The next question, I guess, probably you preempted by saying that publishing isn't as organized as we suspect it might be. But is there an optimum release cycle for a series like this? Because the first 5 books came out annually, and then it's been every 2 years. Is that balancing saturated?
No, that was entirely due to my productivity. So the first 2 books had already been written before the first book came out. So I was already writing the 3rd book by the time the first 2 books came out. You see, so you can see that that's the first 3 years tied up nicely. And the 4th book, no, they come out as soon as basically I hand them in, and they got really fed up with my constantly delayed delivery dates. So they now only announce it once they actually have the hot little thing in their hand. I'd like to do one a week. I'd like to do one a year. I mean, if you count the novellas, I've done one a year for the last. See, I basically write about 1.5 books a year. Okay, and a novella is half a book. So I wrote Winter's Gift and the Masquerades of Spring back to back because I was just feeling funky. I just went, I should not do the Masquerades of Spring. Blah 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 blah. And then I had the Masquerades of Spring, and it was my break glass in case of delay book, right? So because what happens is as you become more popular, you get sent on more trips which break up your writing time. So they sent me on this insane for, I can't remember what it was for, whatever the last Amongst Our Weapons. I went on this insane tour, and this included Germany and the Czech Republic as well, and it just completely broke up my rhythm of writing. And so anyway, this is shall we call it book 10, right? Novel 10. Okay, novel 10 got interrupted, and so I had the Masquerades of Spring. It was my break glass in case of delay, and that's why you're getting 2 years with 2 novellas. But next year you will have book number 10, and who knows what will happen after that. I may die. I don't know, something. Hopefully not. I turned 60, and TFL sent me my "You're Almost Dead" travel card. And it kind of made me feel it gave me intimations. On the one hand, gave me intimations of mortality, and on the other hand, it's like, aha! Now I can go anywhere within the M25 area for free.
I got mine last month, so there you go.
And then, so there's like, you will be dead soon, but also you can go anywhere after 9:30. And now I find it, so and now what with Crossrail, you see, with the Elizabeth line, I'm thinking, now I can go to large parts of London that I haven't really done any work, So I think I can guarantee that the next book after the next one will definitely be a London book. Possibly a London book spread all over the place, because now I can go, here. I can go to Wembley. Yay.
You can go to the end of the furthest station, can't you now?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, I can go to the end of the furthest station. Although I remember when I was up there researching it, I met the lady that ran the Waterstones, and she was very nice, and she knew who I was. I said, "All right, my name's Ben Aaronovitch, give me free stuff," and I asked her some questions. She said, "It's great. Nobody ever comes here. Like, you can, but nobody ever does."
I was going to ask you a little bit about planning. So 9 novels on, have the stories gone the way that you planned them?
I didn't have a plan, so that's
Brilliant.
it's not. I mean, this bears reiterating. It's not like A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, even though he really didn't know what he was doing in the middle, he had a rough idea of where it was going to end. I haven't got that. It's not a fantasy epic, so there's no kind of like end point. It is much more like, all those crime stories. It's basically a detective story. So it's like Morse. It's like Ruth Rendell's detective series, in that I have my cast and I have cases and we get on with it. You inevitably, people get older. Peter is getting older. He's, and as we know, the twins and all that kind of stuff, and getting promoted, and he's taking on more responsibility. At some point, I suspect he'll become a DCI, at which point he probably will stop being a viewpoint character, because DCIs is basically an administrative post. But I don't know. I don't know if anyone will want to read it if it's not got Peter in it. So these are all things you have to think about when you're writing. But I don't think about them too hard, because what I mostly think about is, can I get an extra 200 words out today, or it's just going to be one of those terrible days where I don't get very much done at all. So, and also the characters don't always do what I tell them. They frequently run off in their own directions, going, "Oh!" I mean, I wasn't expecting Bev to get pregnant, so there you go. That took me by surprise.
And are there any other characters that you thought were quite incidental that have become major ones?
About half of them. Okay,
Right.
I'll give you a list, right? Book one.
Okay.
Book one. Molly, right? Literally, I thought he goes into the folly and there's something creepy. What? And I just thought, there's this woman in a maid's uniform with like teeth and creepy. And that's Molly. That's how Molly came about. Dr. Waleed, just there for the pathology. The postmaster in the next book, you got postmaster, and you got this. The most egregious, the two most egregious are Abigail, who was literally annoying local teenage in book 2, graduated to slightly more annoying teenage but related in book 3, and then basically took over the role that initially I think Beverly was refused to do. So Beverly was brought on to be annoying, teenage sidekick, and just went no. Like nah, in that kind of Southland way, and that was it. So there was a space in the narrative for a teenage sidekick, and that Abigail went, "Ha! That is me," and Zachary Palmer, book 3, because he was just there to open the door and let them into the flat. And he's then I wrote the line, almost unbidden, "Give me 5 minutes to hide my stash," and I knew I was stuck with him for the rest of my life. I get quite wary now of people opening doors, because they just appear and then I'm stuck with them, and I have quite a lot of characters. Most characters, Dominic Croft, he wants I imagine them all in this green room, you see, that's sort of like, if you imagine it's behind me, behind that whiteboard, and like every so often they bang on the wall and demand to be in the next book, because they go, "I've been in a book for 2 books. You should put me in." Some of them get novellas as well, so and then they go, "Oh, I got a novella," and all the other characters go, "Got a novella."
So having worked in TV, you mentioned there's a lot of characters. Is it more of a challenge in a book series where there might be a couple of years between books, the readers might have forgotten some? How do you balance reminding the readers of plots and characters versus not irritating them? Because some people may be chain smoking the books, others may not have read one for 3 or 4 years. Is it more of a challenge?
It's almost impossible to predict how someone will react to a book. You cannot predict your audience, especially with novels, right? Because, like you say, some people would have been smoking their way through them, like skimming pages and not noticing half the bloody plot. Others to be listening to them, the mellifluous tones of Cobner in the background, and and others will have been reading them and have forgotten, and gone, oh, did happen in the last one? Oh, I can't remember. And then looking up on the Wikipedia page when they don't know what's going on. So the only thing you can do is write the book you want to write. You can't predict the audience. You can't aim at the zeitgeist. You can't. It's there's no such thing as keeping your fans happy, because your fans are a spectrum. Your readership is a spectrum, and so therefore, whatever you do, someone's going to be annoyed with you. Right, and someone's going to be really pleased. Some people will be really pleased with things. I thought, oh God, I can't put that in. I put it in anyway, and then people will go, oh, I really love that bit, and then some people hated it. You can't work like that. You just freeze up and stop writing. Right, if you start trying to anticipate the reaction, the only thing you can do is sort of, you've got this kind of what they call theory of mind. So you have this theory of how your audience is reacting in aggregate, but you can't really think about it too much. You just have to allow sort of work on it, and then in a general way. You can't do it in a. So I just get on with it. I mean, there is a line in Lie Sleeping where Peter says something along the lines of, and if all this is coming as news to you, you may want to do some background reading. And it's works both as a metacontextual and also a character thing. But that's only because Lie Sleeping really was the culmination of 6 books. And if you hadn't read the other books, it wasn't going to make any sense to really wasn't going to make any sense to anybody. But I try to avoid that. I try to avoid long recaps. I literally have run out of ways of describing what Vestigia is now, and I've just run out of metaphors. It's just I can't. No, I can't think of Vestigia. Except so I get around it a lot of the time by having Peter having to explain it to someone brand new, so that it gets explained, but in a kind of slightly different way, with somebody going, "What are you talking about?" Like that. So. No, you can't think about the readership too much. You just have to punt it out there and hope that they like it. Have
you ever been tempted to include a list of characters, a dramatis personae or something?
I have been tempted, yes, and I've untempted myself. Yeah, I like books with lists of characters, but I don't think so. I don't think so because at its heart there is only one protagonist, unless it's the novellas, and that's Peter Grant. And so therefore you follow him around, and it's not War and Peace, where I read it with like a list of characters beside me, because they all had 3 names and nicknames and pet names. And you had to have that because everyone was talking to each other. But no, I don't do that. I'm not tempted to do that, especially now when everyone has access to the internet. And there's a perfectly good Follypedia, which I have occasionally used myself. Remind myself of something. Well, when you're in a hurry, I've got notes. I actually have a huge database of all of this, but it's because it's so, with 10 books in, it's very cumbersome. It's actually sometimes just easier just to Google it, and it nearly always comes up on the Follypedia. Goes, Tobias Winter is this, and had his rank and everything. It was brilliant.
When the novel started, there wasn't the gap between the present day and today. So now the books are sort of getting to the point, in a couple of years we might hit COVID. So amongst our weapons is still about 8 years behind. Has there been any thought about the pandemic, or is there still a challenge about writing in the past? It'll take a while to get there.
It's becoming very difficult, right? Just because as further away you get it, the more like historical research it becomes. Yeah, I'm doing time skips. I'm jumping 2 years before book 10. Other 2 years for book 11. So book 11 will be during the COVID, because I needed to get past the COVID thing, and also the Met reorganization and everything. I can't go with it because now I've got a Met, and it's actually reorganized since the last book is set, right? So it's like, and you're going, well, what about this? And they go, oh, I haven't done that for 3 years. I know, but the book's set 4 years ago, and since I like to get those things right. I'm going to catch it. Also, the twins are not interesting as 6 months old, but they're much more interesting at 2 years old. Peter as a father is much more interesting, and it's just certain things. that have to be done. I will go back and write some Abigail book, because she's more fun as a 14-year-old than she is as an 18. Well, she's fun as an 18-year-old, but she's much more fun as a 14-year-old, kind of getting into trouble and stuff. Then she's, you know, because she gets a certain amount of sensibleness as she gets older. So I want to write some more Abigail books, you know, just because she's a laugh and you can do fun things with her that you can't do with the other characters. But I don't, my plans are really not that definite. But at the moment, I know that the next book, book 10 of, is set in 2018, and the next book after that will be set in 2020. And I don't know whether I'll keep skipping, or whether that will be enough to just get past COVID, or whether I'll just keep skipping a couple of years or maybe a year. I don't know. It depends on my pace of writing, to be totally honest. Because like it's very, it just, I like to, I want to be contemporary. I don't want to be writing a historical novel. If I wanted to be writing a historical novel, I'd have written a historical bloody novel. Not my fault I'm slow and time marches on. But it is kind of fun, you know, because we will get the fun things. When I say fun, things like the pandemic have happened, and Partygate, and all sorts of enjoyable things to put in the books. The windmill has exploded a couple of times. The windmill theatre has exploded at least once in that period. So, you know, unexploded bombs have been found in the rivers. There's lots of fun things that can happen. Like every time something happens involving a river or a major landmark, I always wonder if Peter is behind it. And so I make a note just in case I can blow it up in the next book.
Sticking with the theme of time frames, this is probably a strange question that's more revealing of the weird way my mind works, so apologies. But in Moon Over Soho, Peter says, "It was the single most stupid thing I've ever done, and that includes running into a tower block 30 seconds before it was due to be demolished." So unless I'm mistaken, he's foreshadowing 2 books further on, which obviously Broken Homes, which got me wondering, when is Peter actually chronicling this? Is he like the guy in the Wonder Years looking back decades, or is he just slightly ahead of the actual, or is that not something you're thinking about?
I don't think about it. I run on the rule of cool, right? Is it a funny line, him saying that's the single most stupid thing except for running into a building? So it's in there, but I don't think to myself, I think he's writing. I mean, to be honest, but it's not canon or anything, but he's writing it about 3 or 4 years ahead of each book. So, I mean, that gets me into trouble, because at some point he's actually writing these out. But you can't, with first person narration, nobody's narration is that detailed. Okay, nobody's recall of events is that precise that they can actually remember the color of people's shoes or something like 30 years later. So well, at least mine isn't. I can't even remember what I did last week. So it's a conceit. Yeah, it's what they call a conceit. It's a conceit of fiction that the first person narrator can remember all these details, and somehow doesn't ever very rarely gives you foreshadowing of when they're going to get biffed on the head or something like that, or doesn't skip over the boring bits, you know, what for them would be the boring bits, like what they ate and things like that. So you just don't think about it too much. It's one of those, don't look now, look, shiny over there, you go, squirrel. That's what you do.
We alluded a bit to the writing process. Do you actually have a set routine, or is it when the inspiration strikes?
Oh God, if only. If I did it every time the inspiration, there'll be even later these books. Part of becoming a writer is learning how to write when the inspiration is not only, you know, not striking, but possibly off on holiday somewhere. I get up in the morning, I go training with my 70-year-old trainer who runs me up various landmarks. Well, I say run, lumbers me up and down and makes me do exercise, which I hate. I hate exercise so much. Then I come home and I do some writing, and then unless someone interrupts me with a meeting or a Zoom or something, I write until I go to bed, basically, or something distracts me like television. That's what I do. I don't really have any ambitions beyond writing more books, to be honest. I've done, because I came to it very late. I was 46, I think, when Rivers of London. So I wrote Rivers of London, and so I've done all the kind of like swimming naked in the Aegean and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want a racehorse, and I don't want to take up motorcycling or sky jumping or something. And so therefore, what I really like doing is writing books. and I'm slow, so I basically just do that all the time. I'm a very boring, like most writers, we're actually very boring people at heart because we live inside our heads. You know, you're never alone like you are when you're having a conversation with a writer who's thinking about something else.
You listen to music while you write?
I actually have dedicated soundtracks for what I'm
Ah.
working on, right? So, for example, when you're writing a sad scene, you got to remember it takes you like 3 or 4 days to write one sad scene. So, what I have is a playlist with lots of sad music. So, you maintain the mood of sadness while you're writing. And I have action sequence music and film scores are very good for writing too, because film scores are designed to sit at a subliminal level rather than impinge upon your consciousness. And like, you know, nostalgic songs from your youth, they're always very good because they're just a part of fabric of your head. So, you know, the 80s some of the 80s classics get played. And I listened to a lot of German pop while when I'm writing the Germans, and I had to listen, unfortunately, to quite a lot of youth music when I was writing Abigail, which was painful. And even with Peter, because technically, you know, he's like 20 years younger than me, I had to listen to grime and stuff while I was writing Peter to work out what the hell he was talking about. But I don't like it. So it's like, I don't, you know, I'm at that stage where it's like, oh, I don't like this noise. Oh, it's all noise. You know,
I think, if I remember correctly, Ian Banks actually put out a CD of the music he used to listen to when writing some of the early novels. But I guess you could do a Spotify playlist if you ever felt the
I
desire.
would if I could have mastered the technology. I would. I don't trust streaming playlists, right? Because I feel they'll just take my music away at an inopportune moment. So I prefer to download it and actually have it non-DRM physically on my phone, which is probably just as easy to nick.
Gonna
Okay.
move on and talk about the novellas, if that's okay.
I love talking about the novellas.
Yay! The novellas don't just expand the universe in terms of characters, but they also quite literally expand it in terms of geography. 3 of the 5 novellas have been in different countries, 2 in the USA and 1 in Germany. And obviously the next one, which is in the USA, is set in New York. Why are you interested in doing that?
Wow. When you're writing a series, you develop these side characters, as you've noticed, who sit in the green room and bang on the wall, going, "Let me, I want to read this book." And some of them are just so compelling. It's not the right word. Characters can take on a kind of weird life of their own. I know it's a conceit, right? But it doesn't actually, because that would be weird if they were real people. But you want to write about them, but they don't fit into the continuity of your story, right? I wanted to write a Tobias Winter story, but I couldn't think of a way of getting into London that wasn't really contrived. And anyway, I wanted to do something from his point of view, not Peter's point of view, you see. So I didn't want to look at Tobias from the outside. If we do anything, we're going to look at Peter from Tobias's point of view, because that's more fun, right? And I wanted to do an Abigail story, and I wanted to do a Reynolds story, and I wanted to do Nightingale slightly different. Nightingale was, I was reading Bertie Wooster books, and I realized that Bertie Wooster had exactly the same syntax as Peter does. Right? They both do these long rambling sentences with occasionally metaphors that occasionally they get wrong, and occasionally are very erudite, and occasionally just completely wrong, and sometimes startling moments, but and then just go into digressions in the middle of kind of like important scenes and things like that. And oh my god, I've been writing Bertie Wooster except as a sort of 25-year-old cop from North London, right? And I thought, well, I'll give that a go. So I wrote myself a couple of pages of a Bertie Wooster character, and I thought, I can do this, right? So the question is, what is that going to be? And I thought, well, that's going to be a 1920s novella. And who's around in the 1920s? Well, it's not, is Nightingale. So it's going to be Nightingale in the 1920s. And then you think, well, where am I going to put it? Who is the main character? And the main character in this case is essentially, you've got to imagine if Bertie Wooster had gone to Casterbrook and become a wizard. That's basically the character. and moves to New York, and then one day Nightingale turns up on his doorstep and drags him into this adventure, because of course all he's interested in is having a good time and living the life of Riley, because he's independently wealthy and a wizard and can do what he likes. And that's where that came from. And then Tobias, I wanted to do a German book, because I was very interested in the difference between German and British policing, where there are quite fundamental differences in attitude and everything. And I thought the Germans will have a different attitude to magic than the British do. So the Germans have they have forms. I mean, like, every police station has a checklist for when to call in the magic police, which is, whereas in Britain it's all done on the old boy network. You see, it's all done on informal contacts. And Abigail, was my chance to write a sort of young adult book. So I thought that would be fun. It's not really a young adult book, but I read a lot of young adult books to get a feel for how young adult books. That's why she's in the present tense, because she just works really well in the present tense. My God, I'm doing that again. I've just finished doing that again, and that's just the present tense. You cannot, if you write a book with one set of people in the present tense and one set of people in the past tense, you just copy it, it just ends up scribbling all over your manuscript because you keep fucking up the tenses. It's terrible. And then Winter's Gift, I wanted to do that's my horror novel. Winter's Gift is basically my horror novel, right? I mean, it's not a very horrifying horror novel, but it's structured like a horror novel in that it's structured, isolated, things closing in, creeping, increasing kind of dread and fear, and then finally, bogeyman come pushing out of the thing, and it's all, oh no, and and cannibalism, an important part of any horror novel, even if it's implied. So that was that. These all came about in different ways to do different things, which you couldn't do, which you couldn't do in a mainstream novel. And the great thing about a novella is when you're writing a novel, you get about halfway through and you get fed up with it. But with a novella, you get halfway, you get 40,000 words, you finish the bloody book, and you can go, oh, done, off it goes.
Is there any definition of what a novella is? Because I know I've read some of the Expanse novellas, and they're barely 20 pages long sometimes.
Well, there's it goes short story. Oh God, I think it's novelette, which is about 20,000 words. Then a novella is about 40 to 60,000 words, and a novel is anything over 60,000 words. You got to remember, these were categories, I think the Hugo categories that came into form when books were very thin. Books were much thinner. If you look at books in the 60s and 70s, tiny thin, that you could fit them slide them under your door, basically. Try doing that with Peter F. Hamilton. See how far you get.
I was going to see if we can find out more about the Masquerades of Spring, if that's okay.
That's okay.
Was it a challenge to have Nightingale in his own novella?
No, because the fucker has been bloody banging on the wall asking for one for the last 10 years. I just opened the door, let him in. Hello. It was fun writing Nightingale as a young man. I mean, he's literally 26 in this book, and at the peak of his kind of like youth and vitality and bounciness. And so that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun having a good viewpoint character, kind of like viewing with a mixture of fear and admiration. So that was kind of fun too. And it, it's nice to, there's a lot of angst around these days. It was quite nice to have a book without any angst. It's a very angst-free book. I mean, it's an out-and-out, I mean, it may not be as funny as a Bertie Wooster book, but it's supposed to be funny. You're supposed to chuckle your way through it rather than go, ah! But I can't write serious anyway. All my books end up being funny, however I start them. With occasional bits of like, in Moon Over Soho, that went in directions I was not expecting. Okay, I did not set out to write a book like that. It's just, then we go down the stairs, and what's at the bottom of the stairs? And there he was.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God.
There probably is no connection, but it might be worth asking. But you said it in the jazz age in New York, and obviously, is there any connection with Moon Over Soho and jazz in that as well?
Not as such. I mean, no direct connections.
Right.
Not. I mean, insofar as there's a lot of jazz about because Peter's dad's a jazz musician, and that one's in the jazz age, and Andrew Cartmel knows a tremendous amount of jazz, and he's on the other end of a phone. And so, if I need to know something, I just phone him up. Speeds up the writing process no end. I can tell you.
But talking of Andrew Cartmel, this is my attempt at a segue. How does the creative process work for the graphic novels?
Well, I wanted to write a graphic novel, right? And I got to the point where I actually had an IP that would allow me to bully someone into letting me write graphic novels, because they won't just hand you because they're expensive. They're more expensive than books, graphic novels. The printing is more expensive. The runs are shorter. The artists have to be paid and things like that. And so they're much more expensive than producing a similar length book. So I went to Titan. I said, I've got this IP. Let me write this book. I didn't want to do adaptations of the novels because the reason why I wanted to do graphic novels, I wanted to explore what graphic novels can do that novels can't do. Graphic novels can do things that you can't do in novels and vice versa. And they're very good at some things. And so basically I pitched the first one and I went with Andrew because Andrew's actually written graphic novels before. And so therefore Titan would know that at least one of us knew what they were doing. And at first we tried to do it where we like a close collaboration, but it was so different in our processes that didn't work. So in the end, what we fell into was where one of us would be the main writer and the other one would script edit it. And then I have the role of making sure it's all kosher, it's all canon. So that was the process we did. So we would pitch stories at each other and then pick one. And then later on we decided, shall we try that with some other writers, see if, because I felt there wasn't enough diversity in our writing things. So he said, well, I know this lady called Celeste and she really wants to write a graphic novel. I was a big, fan. So he said, right, let's get her in. So we essentially subcontracted, and the same with James Swallow, because I knew he was going to write kick-ass action sequence kind of. Sure, James Swallow is going to have helicopters and crashes and mad things, and he came up with a really good story. Like, I wish I'd thought of that. And I have nicked quite a lot of bits of it for the next novel because I thought, well, I own it. You can't sue me at all. It's in the contract. It literally says in the contract, I can nick all your stuff. In that language. It's a very plain spoken contract. And so the process is that some of the graphic novels are primarily written by Andrew with me script editing, and some of the graphic novels are primarily written by me with Andrew script editing. That's basically how it works. And that works the best because then it plays to our strengths, right? I write it at the pace I want to write my one, he writes it at the pace he wants to write his one, but we both go through going, yeah, you can't do that. That makes no sense. Get rid of it. Right. So it works like that. Andy's very detail orientated. So when the proof, what you get is you get the kind of rust come back. He will go through it going, no, look, you've missed that. That's given the speech bubble to the wrong character. That's a mistake. He always spots all the mistakes that I don't spot. So otherwise it would take much longer for me to do those, and there'll be much more. Ask my copy editor, right, about that. My copy editor will tell you that copy editing me is both a joy and a pain.
You mentioned that you can do things in graphic novels that you literally can't do in a book. I think Monday is a great example of that, where you've got things playing out in the background of a frame that don't crop up to be significant until later in
and I wouldn't have even thought of trying to do that. You just wouldn't do that as a novel. You can't do that as a novel. You could probably do something similar, but you can't do something so immediate as Monday. You also can't do things like in detective stories. Each of the stories is illustrated in a different style. So like the first one is done as if it's like CSI, The second one is like, well, go to Slough and it's all shot like Blade Runner, It's like that was basically kind of, and and Lee, who was the artist for that one, really loved all that kind of stuff. He just loved it. Gave him a lot of variety, gave him a lot of different stuff to do. But one of the best examples is in Night Witch, where you have the scene where Beverly phones up Peter and says, you haven't pissed off the Russian gang, Russian mafia, have you? And he goes, no, why do you ask? And then you turn over the page and there's the splash page of her surrounded by the Russian mafia cleaning her house, giving her a thing. And that you just couldn't do that in any other media, because you couldn't do that in a film, because you just know you wouldn't be able to do that even if you have a phone up thing. It was just a very hard crash. But you have that splash page effect where you turn over the page and it's a surprise, right? And basically the whole of Night Witch really just exists for that one joke, because I'm a very shallow man. But also then but you do that, and once I did that, I got into what is the relationship between the river goddesses and their acolytes. Why do some people end up in the court of Mama Thames, right? And that made me think about it, and I had to think about it. And so that became what I thought was quite a poignant thing, where she goes out and tells Maxim to go away, and he won't go away. So, and Maxim's one of my favorite characters. You talk about like random characters. He's my favorite character, one of my favorite characters, because it's just this guy. You see what happened? I was looking for balaclavas, and I came across the panda balaclava. And I thought, I just had this shot of them all in the van, and they were balaclava, balaclava, and there's Maxim in a panda balaclava, and I just like, yes, I love this man. I'm going to do stuff with him, you know. But a lot of writing is like that. You don't necessarily know where you're going. I don't have a plan. I follow the characters a lot of the time, and they just go, oh, I'm going over here. Oh God, no. Plot is character in motion, you see. It's your characters doing things. People make it, oh, do you do plot or do you do character? But plot is your character in action, right? So in some ways, asking whether you do character or plot is the wrong question. The answer is yes.
Talking of plans, another thing that I think Monday Monday is probably Margaret and I's favourite of the graphic novels. Was the sequencing deliberate in revealing the twins before Amongst Our Weapons had actually been published?
No, that was entirely due to a fuck up in scheduling. That has no, God, no, and I thought, oh, solid. So I thought Monday was going to come out after the twins were born, and it didn't. So that was just damn. So, but I thought, okay. I mean, you got to remember that the graphic novels, the sales are like 5 to 10% of the novel sales. So I was fairly confident that no one would know, and those that were interested enough to like look on websites, well, you know. So me, I'm constantly spoiling myself because I can't wait. So, and yeah, we knew it was going to be twins, so it's not like it was a shock. But it would have, you know, in an ideal world. And of course, a year later, it doesn't make any difference because everything's out now. Everything's out. So at the same time, so it's, yeah, in an ideal world, yes, it would have come out after Amongst Our Weapons, but it didn't. So, but I don't cry myself to these niggling little details you find when you're actually on the front line don't matter. You'd like them to come out some way, but you can't get everything you want. It just doesn't happen that way. Especially when you're working. Remember, Titan is one big publishing company, and Hachette is another big publishing company, and My Americans are another big publishing company, and they don't always coordinate very well. And also, they have different ideas about when they want the book to come out. They want the book to come out at a certain time. They don't want it to come out another time. And then, of course, occasionally a pandemic will arrive and disrupt everything. The pandemic came in and screwed everyone over at that point. Not me. Actually, the pandemic was very useful for me because as an introverted writer, I didn't even really notice the lockdown for about 6 months. And I went, oh, I haven't seen anyone for a while.
Talking of doing things you can't do in a book, obviously there's a lot of discussion on Rivers of London social media groups about whether Peter and Leslie in the graphic novels look like the people they had in their mind, but that says nothing compared to the amount of fantasy casting that goes on for any potential new TV series. Has there been any more progress?
I'm really bad at fantasy casting because I can't remember actors. So I'm like, oh, it's that guy, him that was in that thing, you know, the one with the dog. You know, that's my level of recognition for actors. It's still Schrodinger's TV series, as it has been now for 14 years. It's like the tide. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. Sometimes the tide gets close to the shore, and then it goes back out again. And I don't know. I mean, you know, I think we've made more progress in the last couple of years than we have before. I mean, we were getting somewhere with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, except then COVID hit and everyone got kiboshed. So and they had to, you know, they dropped quite a lot of their slate, of which we were part of their slate. And then so there was a point where I was going to just not do it. I thought, I'll give up. I can't cope with this because I want too much control and they don't want to give me any control whatsoever. And it's an expensive show. It's like Slow Horses expensive, but it's not, it doesn't have the same appeal in America. So, you know, you need American money, but they haven't got the faintest idea of who I am. And it just seemed to me that I was just like, oh, I can't be bothered to do this anymore. It takes up a lot of time and it doesn't really seem to go anywhere. And then suddenly someone made us an offer we couldn't refuse. So we're back on the treadmill. But whether the treadmill actually leads to a TV series, we don't know yet. But you'll hear me yelling as soon as the time to get excited will be casting, right? Especially if they're casting Nightingale, because Nightingale is going to be the single most expensive actor probably, because it will be, some 40 to 50-year-old British character actor, that's famous, fairly famous, at least well known in America, which is the same thing as internationally famous. You know that joke, right? Internationally famous means known in America. That's the definition. And so they'll be the most expensive. So they're not going to cast them until they're really sure they're getting some money. So there you go. That's when to get excited. But you'll hear me yelling about it before then. I'll be, no, TV. So I'm, both terrified and exultant at the same time.
You mentioned Slow Horses. Are there any book adaptations of book series that you think they're getting the approach right, that you quite like the way that they're doing it?
Well, you see, the thing is, all books are different, and so therefore, yes, Slow Horses, I think they got the approach right. But Slow Horses, in some ways, is quite conventional in the sense that it's a thriller set in London, right? So it's expensive because it's set in London and it's got Gary Oldman, and so it's bloody well acted, and so all they had to do is not fuck it up. Rivers of London is a complex, special effects laden show with concepts that you have to get over to the audience. You have to get over what magic does do, what magic doesn't do. It's actually quite hard. It's quite a hard sell. And so therefore, I just keep my fingers crossed and hope that something happens at some point. But, I don't have a fantasy casting myself because I've worked too long in television not to even hope that they'll cast anyone I like. I have actually put forward a character for Cobner to play so that Cobner can get a role. So because I figured that would be fun to have Cobner. So, but I can't tell you what it is.
He's got a huge following on Facebook.
He's got a ridiculous following on Facebook and awards. Let's be honest. When I met him, he was unknown, and now he's when we met him, it was like, can we get Cobner to do it? Yeah, Cobner can come in anytime. Now it's like, oh, we have to get Cobner in between filming Marvel films and being on stage with winning Olivia's and things like that. And we're like, and I live in fear that he'll get too expensive. But
audiobooks are obviously pretty huge. Do you get any feel from the publishers about what sort of breakdown there is between people who are listening to Rivers of London and people reading it? Because I'm struck when particularly on the Facebook groups, how many people do use the word listen when they refer to the series rather than read?
Well, some people do both, right? There's this thing called Whisper Sync that if you're on Audible and you have an ebook and it just matches up where you are reading on the ebook to where you're listening. And this is very useful for very thick books, I can tell you, right? When you're reading a J.R.R. Martin and some of it's while you're doing exercise and some of it's while you're reading on the, and I do, but I mean, I'm terrible. I'm an author's dream. I buy the book in hardback because I like to have hardbacks, and then I buy the book in as an ebook so that I can take it on holiday, and then I buy it as an audiobook so I can listen to it on, while I'm walking on my way to the bus station or something. And so therefore they get 3 bites of the cherry out of me. And I suspect I'm not the only person that does that. So I know what my sales are. My sales are 1/3 in British sales. I'm not sure about the American sales, but my British sales are 1/3 each, which used to be unusual. Used to be very unusual in the number of audio sales I got. But
when you say 1/3 each, you mean 1/3 ebook, 1/3?
A third hardback, 1/3 ebook, 1/3.
Okay.
Okay.
1/3 audio. I was generally considered to be unusual, but now that's actually panning out to be about the ratio that you get, I think, for most people now. And when I started, audiobooks weren't automatic, and now audiobooks are pretty automatic. Audiobook, you have but when I started, they were still distributing them on cassette tapes for libraries. So, that gives you an indication of how long ago that was. Don't you feel old now?
I remember some of the early Harry Potter ones that Stephen Fry read was something like 14 CDs in a box.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
And then they managed to get down because they used to put them on MP3s, and now
Yeah.
you won't find a hard copy of anything ever.
Mm.
Even the libraries, you just have an electronic system where you just download it. But that's the thing. That's in the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, it's gone from you might have an audiobook to just about everyone has an audiobook on launch. I mean, I like audiobooks. I like cozy crime, so I go to bed sleeping, listening to cozy crime. I like a nice, relaxing, cozy crime with not too much violence. Usually little old ladies in small towns in America with coffee shops occasionally.
Well, you've got to have a coffee shop.
I have a coffee shop, or they have a knitwear palace or a bookshop or something. And I was into Travis before anyone knew who he was. I read Legends and Lattes when it was, well, actually it was an audiobook, but I would have read it before anyone knew who I was.
I mean, we're just talking of TV. Listeners to the podcast will know I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, and Margaret was a bit worried about me breaching the topic, but you did give an interview just last week at Worldcon about your time on Doctor Who to Radio Free Skaro. So we'll put a link to that if people want to understand.
All the Doctor Who stuff is safely with Radio Free Skaro.
Exactly.
Anything else really,
which is very much their wheelhouse. But one interesting thing you did talk about there was that writing the series of Doctor Who novels while the show was off air was a great opportunity for you and Andrew to learn how to write, but be paid to learn how to write.
Yes, you don't often get paid to learn how to write. In fact, you never get paid to learn how to write. So that was, So some basically W.H. Allen, who were doing the novelizations, basically tooled up and said, "Oh, we'll give you some money if you write this." It's a novella, actually. It was about 40,000 words. Or we can give it to Dick. And I thought, fuck off. I'm going to do it myself. Because I was young. And as I say in the podcast, arrogant and didn't know any better. So you just go, I can do that. How hard can that be? Like, quite hard. And of course, the thing is, once you've taken money, you've got to bloody hand the thing in. So all the problems you have with writing your first book, normally, or you lose interest, or you go, no, you're not allowed to do that. You've been paid. And it wasn't at this point where I had any spare money that I could hand it back. So I just, you just got on with it. And because that's the crucial difference between being a writer and not being a writer, is finishing the bloody book. That's the crucial difference. Anyone can, we all have books inside us, but it's the person that can get it out that is the writer. And then, getting published is almost like an afterthought after that.
The first, obviously, the Remembrance of the Daleks is in print and has been reprinted and is one of the best loved Doctor Who stories. The ones that followed that aren't in print. Is that your decision or some issue with?
No, that's Virgin. Virgin lost the license and they pulped all the books. That's it. Which means every year they get more and more expensive
on eBay and things like that.
About 9 tucked away on a shelf.
That's your retirement plan.
Well, it was at the time. I don't actually need it now, but it's still fun to look at them and go, "Ooh, look, you're worth that. You're worth that." It's not really. They're about 80, 90 pounds. They're not that valuable, but hey, who knows what will happen in the future?
Is there much of a market for young Bernice Summerfield, or is that more niche?
I don't know. I want them to reprint Genius Loci because I'm just very proud of it. But I don't think it sold more than 150 copies total. So
I have one somewhere.
I have one. I have 2, in fact. But I just don't think it sold. I don't think it sold. But I'm very pleased. I liked it, and I did consider buying it back and filing the serial numbers off it and republishing it. But it works so well as the young Bernice Summerfield novel that it would be a crime to just try and make up a different person for it to be about. So I just left it.
Just for non-Doctor Who fans who are listening, Bernice Summerfield was a companion,
a spin-off character.
Yeah.
When it comes to the next main novel, if it's okay, we thought we'd have a bit of fun and just play a yes, no, or a no comment game.
Okay.
So we're going to give you some statements and you can say yes, no, or be very diplomatic and say no comment.
Okay.
So Force Value and Amongst Our Weapons are set in 2016. Is there a significant time jump coming?
Yes, 2-year time jump.
Will the next novel be out next year?
Yes, July 2025.
Ah,
You can absolutely guarantee it will be out next year because I've actually written it. In fact, it's been copy edited and everything. So it's just a question of publication slots now. And they're not going to leave it beyond 2025. They're desperate for that bloody book.
is Leslie in it?
I can't say. No, that would be a spoiler.
No comment. Yeah.
Is it mostly set in Aberdeen?
It's mostly set in Aberdeenshire. Sure. I'm sounding like an American now. Aberdeenshire. And in the sea. It's quite a lot in the sea.
And just a quick one from my mother, who mentions a fan. Are there any plans for her favourite character to have a novella, which is Stephanopoulos?
I'm so tempted, but she got a comic, remember? So, you know, Stephanopoulos. I don't know. I don't work like that. I don't think to myself, I'm going to write a story about this character. A story will arrive and that character is attached to it. So if I ever come up with a really good, hard-boiled lesbian detective story, then Stephanopoulos will be the main character.
So it's in Stephanopoulos' court, effectively.
Yeah, well, if she comes up with a good story, you know, she can stop banging on the green room door. She's like, I mean, Stephanopoulos has had so many cool moments, really, and I love her as a character. I've got no objection to having her, you know, writing a novella about her. But at the moment, I'm not writing any more novellas because they keep getting in the way of the main books. So I have to. I thought what I'll do is I'll try and catch up with myself with the main books, and then I can maybe come up with novellas. Also, I don't have any ideas for novellas at the moment. I mean, I have half-formed ideas, but I don't have ideas.
Can you tell us one fun fact you discovered while researching the next novel that's coming out?
Well, I discovered lots of facts because I went up to a completely different city, which is, by the way, 7.5 bloody hours away by train, which is like, which means it was further away, I might add, than Germany in terms of travel time, and doesn't have a good flight thing to Dice. Yeah, I discovered that Dice Airport is the most busiest heliport in Europe, which was an interesting fact for me, or at least it was in 2018 when the book is set. God, there were so many fun facts. It's like Aberdeen is a fascinating town. There's quite a lot of it, bits of it underground. It's like Edinburgh. It's kind of got things that go under other things and around other things. It's got the population. One fact about it is it's got this big city feel, but it's got about half the population of the borough of Camden. So it's kind of like a contradictory. It's a very contradictory city that way. Yeah, there's a hole in the ground, and Aberdeen has a hole in the ground, right? It's the Rubislaw Quarry. It's about, I think it actually goes down below sea level, and it's where they got all the granite that Aberdeen and everywhere else that used Aberdeen granite from came from there, and then they just shut it in the early 70s and let it fill up with rainwater. So basically, you have a hole in the ground filled with radioactive water. So how cool is that?
Well, very finally, it comes across throughout the whole interview how much you enjoy being in the rivers of London University. You certainly aren't Conan Doyle resenting Sherlock Holmes. But
No, there's no throwing. No, there's no was it Rickenbacker?
Rickenback Falls, yeah.
I wrote a song once. I wrote a filk for myself to the tune of "You got to pick a pocket or two," which was you got to write a sequel or two. And one of the lines was, "Conan Doyle, what a fool, threw his hero in a pool."
Is there any prospect of a character called Ben Aaronovitch doing novels outside of the Rivers of London University?
Yes, there's plenty of that. Just as soon as I get like 5 minutes to rub together in a spare time. Yeah, I've got lots of things. I've got everything from straight crime to space opera to fantasy novels that I would like to write. I'm quite desperate to write a space opera because I'm a science fiction geek at heart, and you know, I want ray guns, I want spaceships. But there you go. You can't always get what you want.
You mentioned being on a promotional tour for a big one for Amongst Our Weapons. Is there anything planned around the Masquerades of Spring that listeners should look out for?
Yeah, I'm doing what I call the East Coast Mainline tour. No, it's East Coast Mainline tour, which is where they shoot me up the East Coast Mainline leaping out occasionally to sign books in various cities as I go past and practically throw me off the train as it goes past. It's not a very long queue. We're trying to hit some indies this time. We're trying to hit indies as well as Waterstones. It's got to the point where I know quite a lot of cities by where the train station is and the Waterstones in relationship to the train station, because I've had to get out at lunchtime, drag my bag to the Waterstones, sign some books, and then drag it back to the train station and go on the train and go to the next city. We'll be doing that. It's not a huge tour by my standards. There's going to be an event at Piccadilly. The main London launch event will be at Piccadilly. I will be signing millions of books at Forbidden Planet. That's probably just a stock signing, but that means you will be able to get signed copies from Forbidden Planet. And probably, my ambition is to sign every single one of my books. So I will be doing that diligently. I will be leaping into bookshops as I pass them and with my Sharpie out going, let me sign my books. I think at some point my ambition is that the books that are unsigned will be more valuable than, like Terry Pratchett, you see, one of the books that are unsigned will be more valuable in the series, afterwards. But there you go. The thing is, I think something that I feel I should say this, right? When you're a writer, you cannot spend too much time in fan spaces. So it's not that we don't love you, and we love your money particularly, but it's not that we don't appreciate the appreciation. It's just that you don't do any work. If you get too sucked into fan spaces, you don't do any work, and partly because you like I said, you get paralyzed by trying to please everyone, or someone says, I didn't like page 47. The rest of the book was brilliant, but I didn't like page 47. And you go into depression for 2 weeks, right? Don't do any writing. Oh, I didn't like page 47. So I just want you to know that I appreciate the appreciation. I mean, I do. And the fact that you like the books, and I love going out and I like meeting people when I'm signing and everything. And just because I don't respond to every tweet and and email and stuff, it doesn't mean I don't appreciate it. It's just that you cannot get too involved. It's just psychologically not very good for you. It didn't used to be like this, but this is a function of our social media age. You can imagine that Ian Fleming didn't have this problem.
There's also a degree to which fandoms where the fans get too involved tend to eat their own tails in terms of.
But also, you don't want to get in the way because they're having such a good time, right? They're having such a good time with fan fiction. I know this from other fandoms, which I am not exactly a member of, but kind of adjacent to, where I'm like Bujold and people like that, where I actually have been known to read the occasional bit of fan fiction, and they're having such a good time with their headcanons and their and their meta-analysis and everything. You don't want to actually interrupt that while they're having such a good time, because that's just you don't want to go, oh, you're totally wrong. You don't want to do that because they're having, who cares? They're having a great time. They don't care. They are they're pretty capable. They're all intelligent people, and they're all capable of separating their headcanons from real fanon from what you're writing, and they understand the difference, and they understand that sometimes they don't care, right? They don't care, or they do care, or they as long as you don't make their life miserable. Well, some writers are trying to make their fans' life miserable, which is just weird to me. So I just want to say that I whatever you want to do, whatever you want to write as fandom, I won't read it, right, by the way, but it doesn't bother me, right? I'm not upset by it. I'm not upset by weird variant things because I don't read them, so I don't get upset by them.
There's an awful lot of stuff about foxes on Facebook that is.
Well, I mean, oh yeah, you asked me which ones bloody came in and stole bloody big chunks of the plot. Yeah, foxes. I was not expecting that.
And cheese puffs.
Yeah, and cheese puffs, which can I point out, are a pastry dish.
They're not a crisp.
They're not a crisp. They're not cheesy whatsits, okay?
No, that's made by Molly and Abigail. Yeah, you actually make
They are cheese puffs, and I got the recipe from the Great British Bake Off website. So if you want to find that recipe for cheese puffs, it's amongst all the, because I just went, I needed something to feed these foxes, and you can't give them chocolate and stuff. There are certain things you can't give to a fox. Can't give. They're like dogs. There are certain things you can't give to them. So I was kind of looking for something that didn't have didn't have onions or chocolate or something that they couldn't eat in it. And I came up with cheese puffs, and it's got stuck as a meme now.
We can add them to the show notes. We always put links at the bottom for people that listen to the podcast.
But it is funny. Yeah, I do find it funny every time like someone sends me a picture of a fox, or when I see a fox and I think the fox kind of looks at me like fucking cheese puffs and walks off because foxes.
Can we just say thank you so much? It's been an utter delight, and we've just been so excited to chat to you this afternoon. And thank you for giving up your precious time to join us.
That's
You
all
gave
right.
us
It's not that
so
precious.
many brilliant insights into the River London world. It has just been so amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you for doing stuff. You know, it's a quite a sad, introverted life, which we enjoy, but I don't think we don't enjoy it. And it is nice sometimes to just get some feedback. Getting some feedback is nice. Otherwise, you're just basically it's like those doing a Zoom meeting where you can't hear the other people, like they're all little squares, and you're just shouting into the void. That's just when you're just sitting there. Am I talking to anyone? Is anyone actually listening to me? I forgot this. Everything is on mute at this point, you know. So yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you for having me.
We plan to be back later in the autumn with a podcast discussing both Winter's Gifts and the Masquerades of Spring.
Meanwhile, if you've enjoyed the podcast, please send us feedback by email at follypodcast@gmail.com or leave a comment on our website, thefollycast.com. The Follycast theme you've been hearing is London is Inspired by Cutwater. By the way, if you want to hear the Follycast theme live, then Cutwater are doing a gig in Balham in September. We'll put details in the show notes. Thanks for listening.